Jim.
We might get some sensible questioning today.
Yes.
Alrighty. We might just get started again. Thank you very much for coming. Look, I note Ms. Havilah, thank you for coming. Mr. Glover, thank you for coming. I might get you each to state your full name, position, title and agency and swear either an oath or an affirmation. Words of both the oath and the affirmation are on the cards on the table in front of you, and I don't need you to do that again, Ms. Foy, unless you really want to.
I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Borzak. I promise to
Start
tell
with you,
the
Ms.
truth.
Havilah.
Lisa Havilah, Chief Executive of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. I solemnly...
Excuse me, could you just actually talk into the mic? We're a long way away now.
Lisa Havilah, Chief Executive of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
Professor Barney Glover. I'm the President of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Would either of you like to make a short opening statement?
Yes, I'd like to make an opening statement, if I may. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. As President of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, I'll respond to your questions, and where these relate obviously to operational matters, I'll seek the advice of the Chief Executive, Lisa Havilah, or the Deputy Secretary, Kate Foy. In my role as President, I've been working closely with the Trust, the Chief Executive and Government to establish the first New South Wales state-significant on-scale cultural institution in Western Sydney, going by the name at the moment of the Powerhouse Parramatta. This visionary investment into our institution is a transformative cultural project that redefines who has direct access to world-class museums and where. It cannot be underestimated the generational impact that the establishment of Powerhouse Parramatta will have on the communities of Greater Sydney and New South Wales. Powerhouse Parramatta will be our flagship museum and will be the most important science and technology museum in the Southern Hemisphere. On the 4th of July 2020, the New South Wales Government announced that Powerhouse Ultimo will be retained. The major investment that has been made through this announcement is consistent with the Trust's position that I have indicated on many occasions: one museum, four sites. I look forward to working closely with the Government, the community and stakeholders across New South Wales to ensure that we deliver together an incredible outcome for Powerhouse Parramatta, Powerhouse Ultimo and the Museum Discovery Centre at Castle Hill, as well as, of course, the Sydney Observatory. The Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences will carry forward its 140-year legacy through its renewal to become an institution that reflects and engages communities and young people with science, innovation, design and technology in new ways and with greater impact. Our museum will stand proudly alongside all of the great museums across the world and will stand in service to our communities of Sydney and New South Wales, as well as becoming a national and international destination. I'm honoured to be entrusted with the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences' incredible encyclopedic collection of over 500,000 objects. The creation of Powerhouse Parramatta and the renewal of Powerhouse Ultimo will provide unprecedented new levels of access to our collection, to exhibitions, education and outreach programs, and support us to document, present and amplify the incredible innovation and creativity of the people of Sydney and New South Wales for generations to come. I and the trustees of the museum are deeply grateful to the New South Wales Government for their commitment and investment into our institution. The Trust is actively engaged in the delivery of the renewal program. I co-chair, with Infrastructure New South Wales, the Project Steering Committee, and other members of the Trust participate in project governance through membership of project control groups. I acknowledge the dedication and the commitment of our museum staff and volunteers who continue to deliver extraordinary outcomes and make a significant contribution to our museum. Over the last 2 years, we've continued to develop exhibitions and programs that have resulted in ongoing increases to visitation and engagement, and I recognise the dedicated museum staff for their professionalism and ongoing achievements. I acknowledge the trustees for their ongoing commitment and, of course, to our Chief Executive, Lisa Havilah. Under her leadership, we're well on the way to delivering 2 world-class museums that will be relevant and engaged with the diverse communities of New South Wales and forever embedded into the contemporary identity of our great city and state. Lisa Havilah, the Chief Executive, will now address the committee.
Thank you. Ms Havilah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. For the opportunity to address you today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gadigal people, and thank them, elders past and present, for allowing us to be here. I acknowledge the President of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, Barney Glover, AO, and thank him for his leadership. It is very rare in a lifetime that a government makes a philosophical investment decision as bold and as transformative as the investment into the renewal of the Powerhouse Museum. The last time this happened in Australia was the creation of the Sydney Opera House in 1971. While both infrastructure projects signify cultural and generational change, the establishment of Powerhouse Parramatta goes directly to the heart of long-held cultural hierarchies of Sydney, to rethink how we define ourselves as a city of sandstone, waterfronts and seafood, to a contemporary identity that is culturally diverse, fine-grained and dynamic. The original intention of the Powerhouse when it was established 140 years ago was to be a museum of the people, to connect community with industry and innovation. I recognise the honour that has been bestowed upon our institution to reflect, recognise and hold the stories of ingenuity and achievement of the people of New South Wales. Powerhouse Parramatta will be the flagship museum of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. At 30,000 square metres with 18,000 square metres of exhibition and public spaces, it will be the largest museum in New South Wales and the leading science and technology museum in the Southern Hemisphere. From our home in Parramatta, we will tell the great stories of technology and innovation, from our first Indigenous sciences to local stories, including Samuel Marsden's contribution to the Australian wool industry, to the Notafang racing car, which was developed at 30 Smith Street, Parramatta. These stories will be embedded within the great Australian traditions of research and invention, from Howard Florey's development of penicillin in 1939 to Graham Clark's invention of the cochlear implant in 1972. Powerhouse Parramatta will be a museum that looks to the future, presenting leading-edge science and technology as it's created, including innovations in robotics, data visualisation and artificial intelligence. In a world first, Powerhouse Parramatta will incorporate accommodation for regional New South Wales students to immerse themselves in STEM learning and connect with international leaders in the fields of science and technology. These experiences will provide each one of them with the opportunity to develop new ambitions, creating pathways for future generations. Powerhouse Ultimo will be Australia's leading museum of design and innovation. Its home in the Ultimo Power Station will provide the context to tell the stories of the age of industrialisation and its ongoing impacts which continue to shape our world. The iconic Powerhouse objects, the Bolton and Watt, Locomotive Number 1 and the Catalina flying boat, and the ideas they represent will frame periods of extraordinary innovation and creativity that influence design, architecture, fashion and visual communication. The Powerhouse Museum holds the stories of our great designers, from Florence Broadhurst, whose work has influenced Akira Izugawa and Catherine Martin, to Jorn Utsen's original architectural models that inspire today's architects and designers. I have dedicated my professional life to ensuring that the diverse communities of Greater Sydney and New South Wales have direct access to culture. From Liverpool to Campbelltown and Redfern, and now from Parramatta to Castle Hill and Ultimo. I have embedded collaboration, cultural relevance, access and entrepreneurship into my practice. I've seen firsthand the impact that connecting communities with their histories can bring to creating engaged and cohesive communities. I am determined through this great institution to make our histories relevant, to tell great stories, to connect communities with our extraordinary encyclopedic collection, and to continue to document our great innovations. I'm honoured to be able to bring my experience to my role as the Chief Executive of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences to collaborate with the incredible museum team, which step up every day, the Trust and the Government to contribute to the renewal of our institution for the benefit of the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Professor Glover, when were you informed by the government that they had planned to retain the Ultimo site?
I received a phone call from the Premier's office the day before the announcement was made.
Day before the announcement. Did you have any indication that the government was moving in this direction?
I wasn't aware that the government was considering the announcement that they made. We were doing a business planning process for Ultimo, of course, so we'd been involved at the project steering committee level with a range of discussions about options for the future, and of course retaining a museum presence on that site's always been a priority for the Trust.
Yep.
So those conversations had gone on, but I think the scope and scale was something that I wasn't aware of until the day before.
Thank you, Professor Glover. Ms. Havilah, you described the project from your opening statement as bold, transformative, and you compared it to 1971 to the Sydney Opera House. What will be the cost of retaining the Ultimo site? Now, the Arts Minister said $840 million for Powerhouse Parramatta,
No, that's not what he said.
So he said 840 net for Parramatta and Discovery.
and Castle,
Yeah.
So 840 net cost for Powerhouse Parramatta and Castle Hill Discovery.
That's more accurate.
140 for Riverside and Associated Arts.
No, Walt, he said that was part of 840.
Part of the 840.
Oh, he said it was part of the 840. Because it was a bit confusing.
No, it wasn't. It was absolutely clear.
Okay, so 840.
Shadow Treasurer.
Order.
Apologies to the witnesses here.
840 for Powerhouse,
Jeez, very-
Parramatta,
Address the
Castle
comments
Hill.
through the chair, please.
Sorry.
And you should address your questions to
Okay.
the witnesses.
This is very confusing.
Only to one person.
For you.
This is very confusing. I think it's very confusing for the community, very confusing, and it'll be very troubling for the taxpayers. So I would like to know what is, okay, so we can agree 814 million net Powerhouse Parramatta, Castle Hill Discovery, Riverside Theatre. We can all agree 840. What is the projected price tag to retain the Ultimo site, Ms. Havilah?
That's subject to a business case that's
Right.
currently being prepared.
And that business case, we understand from the minister, is $5 million. And the minister said in proceedings this morning that it would be, sorry, let me just get this right here. And that 46 million had been spent, oh no, so that was my figures, 46 million plus 5 million had been spent on consultants. And he
Minister
said,
didn't
And that's not correct.
what did he say?
He
He
said
said
19 million.
19.
Since
No,
some date in
2017.
2017.
2017, they took it on notice. So how much has been spent on consultants to now?
Since mid-2017, approximately 19.6 million has been spent on consultants by Infrastructure New South Wales, Create New South Wales, and the Powerhouse for the development of Powerhouse Parramatta. This includes costs associated with the purchase of the site, the development of the Powerhouse Parramatta business case, running the international design competition, conducting the collection.
I
Ms.
don't mean
Havilah, we've
to
heard
interrupt. We
this
had
one
those exact
before.
words earlier.
Yeah,
saying
we don't want to be rude, but
They're probably, those costs are overall program costs, of which MAS has some of them. The Minister's answer this morning obviously stands, and we have no further information.
It's useful having you here in both sessions, Ms. Foy, to just cut those off.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdge.
Could I just quickly ask Ms.
Well, no,
Boyd-
I haven't finished.
I was just going to ask if she could bring the microphone closer to her so we could hear her
Of
answers.
course.
Just to assist, Mr. Secretary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Ms. Havilah, when were you informed that the government had decided to retain the Ultimo site?
I was informed by government the day before the announcement, and I was very excited to get that news, and it was very warmly welcomed by the museum.
Thank you.
Were you frustrated in any way that this has been an ongoing project announced, I think, 5 years ago, and an indication when Minister Harwin took over in 2017 that he wanted to retain some kind of cultural presence on the site, and now in 2020 we have yet a new iteration of that? I mean, presumably you yourself and your staff have put quite a lot of work in over all those years towards one policy outcome, and then to have 1 day's notice of a new policy outcome. Was that frustrating for you?
No, we were absolutely thrilled with the announcement and the outcome. And we have, all of the museum and I and the Trust work very closely with government on the development of the business case. And we're looking forward to working through what the future of the museum will be at Ultimo.
Ms Havilah, how can you say you work closely with the government on this when you were blindsided by the announcement on the 4th of July? The first you heard about it was the 3rd of July. You were blindsided, weren't you? You weren't working closely. You were blindsided.
No, I work closely with Create New South Wales and our delivery partner, Infrastructure New South Wales, every
Even
day.
the Minister said he was blindsided this morning.
It's a decision by government. It's the government's decision. And my position is to get the best outcome from the museum. And I think this is a great decision, and we warmly welcome it.
But you have a joint project team that, Professor, you're the chair of, never went to the joint project team, did it?
Well, I imagine all members of the Project Steering Committee were informed at the same time I was, which was the day before, yeah.
It didn't go to the Project Steering Committee, did it, Professor?
Well, he's just answered the question.
No, that you didn't. You gave an oblique answer. Did it or did it not go to the Project Steering
Well,
Committee?
my apologies for the oblique answer. It wasn't meant to be oblique. I simply assumed I was one member of a committee that was informed on that day.
Did it go to the Project Steering Committee?
Well, there wasn't a meeting of the Project Steering Committee at which that proposal was presented prior to the announcement by government.
It didn't go to the Project Steering Committee, did it,
Answer the
Professor?
question.
I've answered your
This is-
question,
Goodness sake.
Mr. Schubert.
So how can you pretend?
make a point of order,
how can
please,
you
Mr.
pretend
Chair?
there's a collaborative project?
I make a point
when
of order,
it's not even
please, Mr.
Project
Chair?
Steering Committee.
Point of order.
Mr. Chair, I understand robust and strong and strident questioning to the Minister who deals with this sort of stuff every day. But for witnesses like the ones that we have before us, I'd just ask that the questioning be made a little more quiet and a little more respectful.
Okay.
That's not actually a point of order, but
Actually,
I think Mr. Glover does know how to deal with it. He's been in front of us a number of times.
I know that, but I mean, I do believe that Mr. Shoebridge was actually hectoring the witness here, I just think that
I
we
don't
should
think Mr.
maintain-
Shoebridge even got started hectoring.
well, that's
To the point of
But
order.
I-
To the point of order. I reject the concept of hectoring. When we get oblique answers, we're allowed to press and try and understand what, get a clear answer on the record. Oblique answers will inevitably produce follow-up questions.
Getting a clear answer on the record is fine. Being rude is not.
Well, I wasn't being rude. And
I think you
reject
were.
that.
With respect.
I would just ask Mr. Glover to try to answer the question directly so that there aren't any follow-up questions or any potential for hectoring.
I did answer the question directly.
Ms. Havilah, it wasn't ever presented to the Joint Steering Committee, which your president is the chair of. It wasn't presented to you. It wasn't presented to the board. How can you pretend it's a collaborative project? How can you pretend that, given that unarguable history?
Well, I don't have to pretend because I work closely with government every day, whether it is Create New South Wales or Infrastructure New South Wales. I'm part of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, so I do collaborate every day, as does the museum team. The decision that was made was a decision of government, which I was informed of, and I strongly welcome.
You were informed of once it was made. You weren't consulted about it. You weren't given any advance warning. You weren't given any input into it, were you?
I was part of the development of the business case, which led to this decision, which had a number of options. And I also support the direction of the Trust, which was always to have one museum over 4 sites.
No, but your own submission says that the CBD site will be located at the Ultimo Creative Industry Precinct or at the Land Titles building on Macquarie East Street. You had no idea where it was going. And
It's a
is that right?
decision of government.
Was this an outcome that you were pressing for privately? Was it something that you had been using your position as CEO of MAS to advocate for? Is that why perhaps you weren't surprised because you had been pushing for
Well,
it?
for the record, Ms Havilah never said she wasn't surprised. And I don't think you can assume that.
Perhaps can I make comment, Chair?
You can answer for herself. I don't need you helping me, David, honestly.
Well, I'm trying to help her.
May I just offer a comment in terms of the
Never said you were surprised.
Order.
May I offer a comment in terms of the steering committee? So steering committees are there to implement decisions of government. We have the responsibility to manage the scope, the cost and the timing of projects. That's jointly done with the chairmanship of Professor Glover along with Simon Draper. We are tasked with implementing those decisions. Certainly the Minister said this morning, I think Ms Havilah and Professor Glover have said it, that the retention of a creative industries precinct at Ultimo has been the Minister's intent since he's assumed his role as the Minister for the Arts. We have, as part of our business case development, involved the retention of a museum presence. I think the focus was fashion and design. This is a decision for government. The role now of the steering committee, of which I am a member as well, will be to implement that decision of government.
Ms Havilah, were you surprised by the announcement?
I didn't know the decision was coming, so yes, I was surprised, but I was surprised in a way that that was incredibly positive, and I warmly welcomed it. And I think I'm very thankful for the increased investment into the renewal of our institution, and I look forward to working with government and being part of a consultation process in the development of the business case, which will ultimately determine how the museum operates in Ultimo.
Had the option of retaining a Powerhouse presence at Ultimo, the announcement that was made on July 4, had that been one that had been subject of conversations or advocacy on your part prior to the announcement? Had it been something that had...
It was always a consideration that a cultural presence, as the Minister said this morning, it was always the intention that there was a cultural presence retained on the site. The form that took was part of the business case development process, and the decision that was made in terms of retaining the museum in Ultimo was a flow-on from that process.
But you've mentioned a couple of times that this is a sort of natural or to be expected outcome of the business case development process. We've been told that the business case is not finalised and will not be finalised until the end of the year. So something has happened at some point prior to July 4, prior to the finalisation of the business case, that has led Minister Harwin and the Treasurer to stand up and make this announcement. Have you been given any indication as to what that event was, why this announcement, public announcement, was made at that point? The business case is in development, you're involved in these ongoing conversations, you're advocating to keep a presence at the Ultimo site. Suddenly, out of nowhere, you're receiving less than 24 hours notice that the next day, a quite significant policy change is going to be announced.
And a positive policy change.
A commitment
And a
commitment
positive
to keep
policy change.
the Powerhouse at Ultimo. And did you ask why that was occurring? What has led to this announcement happening?
No, I didn't ask that question. I, warmly received that information, and I welcome the investment that government is going to make in Ultimo, and I'm looking forward to working with them on the business case and on the consultation of the business case in terms of working through what the Powerhouse will be in Ultimo.
But Ms Havilah, didn't you say you thought this decision came out of the development of the business case for the creative precinct? Isn't that your evidence earlier?
Well, there are a number of options that were being developed, and it was always the intention, as the Minister said this morning, that a cultural presence was retained at Ultimo.
Are you saying that one of the options that was being explored in that business case was the precise option that's now been stated by the government, the retention of the Powerhouse site? Are you saying that's what was one of the considerations for that,
I'm
business
saying
case? I don't understand. What are you saying?
I'm saying that the business case was in development and that the government made a decision, and now we'll develop a new business case for the future of Ultimo, and we'll work closely with the government on that.
But the 4 July was a change of stance, wasn't it? The 4 July position was a change in stance. It was quite a significant change, wasn't it,
It's
Ms
not
Havilah?
appropriate to ask this witness those matters. You had
course it
the
is.
minister.
Well, of course it is, if she's working on the business case. Of course it is.
She is a public servant, David, and
But
it's
if-
unfair to be putting that
This
style
witness
of
is
question
saying
to
that the
this
prior
witness.
business case was what led to, one of the things that led to the change, and I'm trying to explore if this prior business case
Yeah.
contained the 4 July option as one of the options.
Well, you're entitled to ask that.
What I'm
but
asking.
That's not what you're
Look,
asking.
you should address your comments through the chair.
Well, I will, Chair.
By motion.
It is unfair to a public servant witness to be putting matters that essentially ask her to reflect upon a policy decision of government.
Well, to be
And
clear,
that's what is being done.
I'm not asking this witness to reflect upon the decision. I'm trying to clarify what, if anything, this witness is trying to say about whether or not the pre-existing business case workings included the 4 July option or not. And that's what I haven't got an answer from you, Ms Havilah.
Mr Shibridge, may I say, the business case is being developed by my agency, and Ms Havilah is providing input, quite significant input as the Chief Executive.
Yeah.
The business case is in development. It had considered is considering a range of options. It certainly hasn't been presented to government yet. It will take into consideration the decisions made on the 4th of July around the specifics of Ultimo and the museum at Ultimo, but that's my job to complete the business case and to present that to government
Ms
in due
Havilah
course.
volunteered in a previous answer that it was her position, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms Havilah, that the development of that business case that Ms Foy just spoke about was one of the reasons why, throughout the development of that, led to the 4 July decision. Now, if that isn't your evidence, please clarify what your evidence is about whether or not the 4 July option has at all been considered in the development of the business case before the announcement.
No.
Well,
No,
what
the,
is your position, Ms Havilah?
The business case, which was in development, has not been submitted to government, as Ms Foy said, so it wasn't considered. No options had been presented to government. It was a separate decision.
Ms. Foy, when the July 4th announcement, when did work on the business case begin?
The business case has been in development for some time at the moment. I'm happy to refer to my staff and see if I can get the original date that it started or take that on notice.
But work on the business case to retain the Ultimo site began after July the 4th.
It has always been a part of the business case to retain a museum presence at Ultimo. I think some of the thinking at the time, or the thinking has been creative industries, a museum presence, fashion and design was one of the options inside, the stuff that's inside the museum. The government has made a decision to continue with, so there's two, if I may I go back just to some of the principles about the museum. We've got two major bits there where there are exhibitions. There's the heritage core, which is largely where those large items are, like the Bolton Watts, and the Catalina, etc. And there's the touring hall, which is in the Rand building. We had, as part of the business case, we look at what museum presence is retained in what part of that footprint. The government has made a decision, so in fact, a museum presence as part of a business case pretty much remains unchanged. There is a museum presence. The Ultimo, the part of the heritage core that is being used, and the Catalina and those very large objects, etc., that is the part that remains. The other part of the government's decision was 195 million as part of a yield or a revenue, if you like, from the Ultimo site would go towards Parramatta. That is now no longer required, so that 195 million is not required for a broader redevelopment of Ultimo, if you like, so the museum remains. We're looking at how does that all work together now. So the business case it's not radically new, and we retain the information that's already there. It's not significantly new. It just becomes more specific in terms of what is the museum presence at Ultimo. And we do work with Ms Havilah, we work with Infrastructure New South Wales and a range of other stakeholders in the development of the business case. We have expert input into it, and we work closely with the Trust through the President and through the governance, so the steering committee. It hasn't yet been presented to government, and as the Minister indicated this morning, it's anticipated to be completed this year for submission to government.
Now, Ms. Havilah, there was some discussion this morning about an August 2014 report that said that $500 million would be needed.
That was not the evidence this morning. The 500 million is a figure that you quoted.
From the Daily
Minister corrected you on that.
From the Daily Telegraph.
300.
The Minister
Somewhere between
corrected you.
300 and 500. Okay.
350, I think, was the figure.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I think it was 300 and 500. Adjusted to inflation became 350.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And let's agree on 350 million. Okay, 350 million to bring the Powerhouse Ultimo up to site because, quote, it was compromised and it wouldn't be able to continue without a major overhaul. How has that been factored into the costs of the Ultimo site?
So a business case, we're working closely with Create Infrastructure on the development of a business case which will identify the costs required to renew Ultimo, and that will be a decision of government.
Do you stand by the business case that was completed and put forward in 2014 that put a figure on that very question of what it would cost to bring that site up to scratch, which was placed at somewhere between $300 and $500 million?
That was a business case that was authored before my time. So I look forward to working with Create Infrastructure on the development of a new business case that takes into consideration the operation of the museum going forward, and all of the thoughts that the Minister presented this morning in terms of how it can respond to its landscape and the changing nature of Ultimo as well.
Ms Foy told us earlier that there's a master plan being created for the Ultimo site. Are you aware of that, Ms Havilah?
As part of the business case, yes.
Well, it was my understanding, Ms Foy can correct me if I'm wrong, that the master plan would inform the business case and was separate to the business case. Is that right, Ms Foy?
Well, it's part of the whole business case approach, and it informs. So when you have the master plan, it talks about potential uses on the site, and that then informs elements like cost planning, etc., and the options as part of the business case. So it's a business case activity, as I understand it. It's a business case activity that informs the economics and the costings as part of the business plan overall.
Strikes me as sensible to work out what you want to do with the site before you go down to a detailed costing. And I assume the master plan is intended to inform you as what you want to do with the site.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, yes. A master plan will help you understand what the options are inside that site.
So, Ms Havilah, are you producing that master plan, or is somebody else producing that master plan? Who's responsible?
Create Infrastructure.
I'm responsible, and Create Infrastructure, which is part of my portfolio, is responsible for it.
And what
if there's
role...
details, I'm very happy to take them on notice.
All right.
But
So what role does Ms Havilah have in the development of something that's so critical to her institution as the master plan of the site?
So this is a very large, complex project, and as Mr Draper indicated this morning, we he appears quite a lot around it. So you have, as part of our governance for the program, you have a client. Ms Havilah is the client because they are operating a museum, so they bring their expertise about the design and operation of a museum, the collections, and the storage, etc. So that's their expertise. As Department of Premier and Cabinet and Create, we are responsible for the implementation of the Cultural Infrastructure Plan, which is my accountability. So I will run activities around the business case. I'm the sponsor of the program. So work with all of the stakeholders around the overall program. My Create Infrastructure is responsible for the business case and the business case development in consultation and collaboration with all parts of government. Infrastructure New South Wales is responsible for the delivery of Parramatta, and they are responsible for the planning process, so the SEED process, and the state significant development, and ultimately the procurement of a builder and the construction, and then that is handed to the client to operate. And the client is involved very deeply, both in all levels of governance, as well as on the project team on a day-to-day basis.
Ms Havilah, what public consultation and what stakeholder consultation are you going to do in order to inform your input into the master planning process? Are you going to talk to anybody, or is it all going to be private?
So, in the development of the business case for Ultimo, of course, we work right across the Powerhouse team. We work closely with the Trust. We'll also be undertaking a formal consultation process as part of the development of the business case with the community and others.
What does that mean, a formal consultation process with the community? Are you going to be putting some options out there so the public can see?
We'll be, as part of every business case, there is a consultation process, and so we'll be undertaking a consultation process with Create Infrastructure as part of that.
Well, Ms Havilah, you said, and I quote you, that you embed collaboration into all of your work. So what collaboration are you going to be doing with the public about the development of the master plan and the development of the business case?
The business case, as I said, Mr Shoebridge, is a matter for Create New South Wales, and we will be undertaking any obligations for consultation that are required through the any planning process. But ultimately, the business case is a matter to be submitted to government. Ms Havilah has been deeply involved in the consultation around the Parramatta project. I think she's personally been attending nearly every community consultation.
Yeah, 60 hours of consultation, yeah.
But at this stage, the business case is a matter for us to develop options for consideration of government, and whatever we're required to do as part of any process to consult with the community will be undertaken, but ultimately that is a decision for government and for us to comply with whatever the rules are that we have to comply with.
Any master plan for this site would be assisted by engagement with the community and engagement with a variety of very, very well-informed key stakeholders. And I've not heard any commitment from you, Ms Foy, or from you, Ms Havilah, to have a formal public consultation about the master plan. And I find that unfortunate.
Perhaps, Mr Shoebridge, the way I'm explaining perhaps how we're understanding the master planning process may be different, and the definition of that might be different between us, but I'm happy to come to you with more detail and, if possible, just get some detail on what that is. But it's largely to look at the functions and uses and potential uses and options of the main parts of that precinct, whether it's where the Harwood building is, the Heritage Core, the Rand building, the forecourt or the car park, and what the potential uses are in those, with the direction of government to retain the Powerhouse at Ultimo, to have a fashion and design museum presence there, and within any heritage constraints that may be determined.
Can I ask about some of the sort of flagship exhibits? The Minister in his evidence this morning indicated, and I think provided a guarantee, that the Locomotive One, the
Catalina,
the Bolton and Watt and the Catalina
Flying thing, yeah.
would all be retained at Ultimo. But I understand, Ms Havilah, that you had potentially indicated that at least the Bolton and Watt would be moved to Parramatta. So is that your understanding of the government's expectations? Can you give us any indication of what your understanding of the status of the location of those flagship exhibits is?
Yes, so the Bolton and Watt, Catalina the Catalina and locomotive number 1, and the iconic powerhouse objects will be retained at Ultimo.
And so if that's the case, what, and I think in your opening statement this morning you indicated that at the Parramatta site it was intended that sort of flagship exhibitions would be held there. So what is going to be in the Parramatta facility?
So at Parramatta there'll be a focus on science and technology. We have been focused on ensuring that Powerhouse Parramatta meets the needs of the presentation of the Powerhouse collection, and I'm working with the Powerhouse team on the development of exhibitions for the museum when it opens in a number of years. And
so if it is going to sort of live up, I think, to the standard that not just that you have described, that the Minister has described, that we all hope will be this world-class, world-leading facility in Parramatta, in order to make that real, presumably significant investment is going to be needed to actually bring the exhibits, bring the exhibition, bring the content to that museum. If all of the existing big flagship assets of the Powerhouse are staying at Ultimo, Parramatta is to realise the vision that we've all been described and we all hope will be there. Other than, some positive references to science and technology, what's actually going to be there that's going to be, and where's the funding to ensure that it's going to be as good as what that community's been promised?
So the museum has over 500,000 objects, and
but all of the
just let her finish. Just let her answer a question.
As long as she doesn't list them.
The museum has over 500,000 objects, and in Ultimo, only 10% of the collection has been able to be shown in the 32 years that the museum's operated there. So I will be working closely with our incredible team of curators across science and technology that will develop a whole range of exhibitions. We will be including in Powerhouse Parramatta a 360-degree immersive screen space. So we'll be also commissioning a range of digital exhibitions that will focus and provide opportunities for young people to engage with STEM and STEM education. And so all of that work is under development, and we look forward to revealing it as we get closer to the opening of the museum.
Has there been any additional funding provided or earmarked for the development of flagship exhibits at Parramatta?
As part of the Parramatta business case, the operational funding of the museum is currently being considered by government.
Ms. Havilah, earlier in the year there was much discussion, and the call for papers revealed that the government had plans and was engaging in dialogue with a number of regional councils and regional museums to, to share some of the collection. You said 500,000 objects and only 10% of the collection is. So is it accurate to say that the representations from Goulburn Mawarri Council for the steam engine, that's completely dead in the water then?
So we have a long history of collaborating with regional museums, not only across New South Wales, but across Australia, and we loan objects regularly as part of our normal business as usual as a museum. We have a request from Goulburn City Council, and our collections team are currently considering that request, and there's been no determination made at this stage.
They still have hope of getting the steam engine? Because the representations deal directly with the steam engine. They have a long-term connection with the steam engine.
Yeah. Our staff are going through that process. We need to check things like environmental conditions and context, and a whole range of different perspectives in terms of considering a loan. And so we are going through that, following that process, and we don't have an outcome as yet.
So an outcome has not been made on the steam engine going
Correct.
to Goulburn?
Yeah.
Sorry, is it still seriously on the table to relocate the Bolton and Watt
No.
No, I'm talking about the beam engine.
Talking
Beam
about
engine,
the
okay,
Maudsley
sorry.
beam engine.
I was asking about the steam engine.
Yep.
Steam engine from Golden Mulwari.
Yep.
Now, what about the locomotive? So the locomotive one down to Thurmere is gone. That's because you said in your earlier answer that locomotive one.
Locomotive number 1 will be retained in Ultimo.
So okay, so that's fine. So you've clarified that. Now, Ms. Havilah, the July 4th announcement. Will that have any impact on the timetable? The minister said that he planned to hope to have the Powerhouse Parramatta opened in late 2024. Does the July 4th announcement have any impact on that?
No, it doesn't.
Does that? What was the reaction, or what happened on Monday? So on the Friday, some of the 95 staff, I think the casuals, were on the verge of being let go, or were going to be let go. So are all the people? What's happened to those 95 staff? Can you?
We've retained all of our staff.
all of them.
Yes.
Good.
And we intend to retain them. There was, even through COVID, which I'm incredibly proud of, we were able to retain all of our staff, including our casual staff, and we successfully redeployed them into other areas of museum operations, including working on the collection digitisation project.
Professor Glover,
Could I just quickly follow up on the collection digitisation? Where are you up to with the digitisation project? Is it completed?
I shouldn't have said yes.
It's on track. We're 12 months into that project. It's a 4-year project.
I don't have any questions.
It's an incredible project where we're actually assessing and photographing
Why don't you leave again?
384,000 objects from our collection, which will provide completely new levels of access to the community to the collection.
Particularly regional communities, right?
Absolutely.
In fact, if you go on the website, you get a good sense, as it's updated on a regular basis, of the items that have been digitised and are up and available.
Oh, so you're actually rolling them out?
Yeah, you could roll them out. I
as
think
it's
there's a couple of thousand at the moment
Yes.
that are available on the website. And there's been
Updated every week.
a very comprehensive program of identification of the items, the conservation aspects that have to be taken into consideration, and then, of course, the digitisation and uploading. And there have been some great moments as the team uncovers new information about items in the collection. So it's
These items you didn't know you had.
well, we knew we had them, but we got
know where
extra
they were.
information. Let me finish. Extra information about them, Chair. Thank you. I think, Walt, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask. thank you.
I'll do my
Professor
best to chair.
Thank you, Professor Glover. I shouldn't have said yes, Ben.
I really appreciate it, though. It's a great project.
Okay, Professor Glover, has the board met either via Zoom or since the July 4th announcement?
Yes, we met immediately as soon as we could convene. I think it might have been the Tuesday after.
Tuesday after,
Yeah.
that's okay. And
By Zoom. Yeah.
Via Zoom. And what were without going into details, I guess I'd just like to know, what were the decision or the business papers, what decisions were you required to make any decisions to facilitate the government's announcement?
No, it was essentially an opportunity for me to brief, and for Lisa, of course, as Chief Executive, to brief the Trust in relation to the decision.
Okay.
As I said, I only heard the decision the Thursday before, so there was not a lot of time to digest it. But we gave a comprehensive briefing to the board, and I think it's fair to say, as Lisa indicated earlier, we welcomed the government's decision because, and I know I've said it on a number of occasions, both publicly and in the inquiry that preceded this committee, that the Trust has advocated for one museum, 4 sites. We have always advocated to retain a significant presence at Ultimo, and the decision that the government made, of course, reinforces the fact that full retention of Ultimo through the business planning process that's to come is a very welcome decision.
Well, Mr. Glover, that's not true, though, because your own submission says this: the Sydney CBD site will be located at the Ultimo Creative Industries precinct or at the Land Titles building on Macquarie Street East. I'm reading from the opening paragraph of your own submission.
There's nothing inconsistent with what I've just said.
You said you were always arguing for the retention of Ultimo, yet your own submission says that part of your planning was potentially having the only CBD site at the Land Titles building on Macquarie Street East.
Always the Sydney Observatory, there would always be a CBD site. As I said, one museum, 4 sites. We welcome the decision to fully retain Ultimo. The government did suggest the potential for the Land Titles building, and quite appropriately, the museum and the Trust considered that as an option. We're very pleased that Ultimo is being retained.
Minister, when you, Professor Glover, when the board met on, was it Tuesday?
I think it was a Tuesday.
Tuesday. Were there any legal requirements of the board to ratify or approve any of the change of direction?
No, because we, as I think both Lisa and Kate have indicated, we're in an ongoing business planning process, had been for some time, about the future of Ultimo. And that business planning process had yet to deliver an outcome to government. Government, I think, my interpretation of their announcement was to give a very clear direction about where that business case should focus beyond July the 4th. So we weren't required to make a decision. The overwhelming view of the Trust was we welcome the decision, we welcome retention of Ultimo, and we look forward to that business planning process giving us greater clarity about the investment that will be required for the refresh and the refurbishment of Ultimo.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Professor Glover, you've long been an advocate, publicly and privately, for greater investment and, greater investment in Western Sydney and reinvigorating that part of Sydney, or perhaps not even reinvigorating, invigorating that part of Sydney. And that's been as part of the ongoing sort of community contestation about what happens with the Powerhouse Museum and its relocation. You've been really a strong advocate for why having the facility in Parramatta is such an important part of investment in Western Sydney. As you say, you've welcomed the decision for the full retention of the Powerhouse at Ultimo, including all, in a way, of the key flagship exhibits that will now not be coming to Parramatta. Are you concerned at all that the decision that the government has made on July 4 is going to make it more difficult to meet those important goals around the establishment of a significant site in Western Sydney?
No, it's a good question, though, Rose. Thank you for it. I mean, as Lisa indicated, we have a very large collection. That's the first
I guess I just
aspect.
want to, on that...
Let him finish. He's actually answering the question, Rose.
I do want to answer the question directly, Rose. My view is that we have a very large collection. Yes, you're right. The Catalina, Loco No. 1 and Bolton Watt will remain in the heritage core at Ultimo. That's very clear, and a very clear decision of government that shouldn't be, they should not be considered for relocation or being put on display in Parramatta. However, we have a very extensive collection now. Parramatta has been designed not simply to highlight the very large objects, of which we have a 39, I think, very large objects. Yep. There is an opportunity for more of those to be on display in Parramatta. There's also wonderful opportunities for large-scale touring exhibitions to come, and the Powerhouse does manage very large touring exhibitions on a regular basis, and business plans for those exhibitions over a long time frame. As Lisa said, we're now beginning to think through those opening large-scale exhibitions that we'll need for Parramatta and for Ultimo, commencing when Ultimo opens refreshed, but when the Powerhouse opens in 2024, late 2024, as the Minister's indicated. Plus, there are new spaces created for the first time that the Powerhouse has not had access to in Parramatta. And I do want to re-emphasise the importance of the immersive space. This is an extraordinary space. It's been designed within the museum there to create a 21st century digital environment for the public to have access to a whole range of virtual environments and augmented environments. That's a wonderful part of a 21st century museum. There's big educational spaces. There's very large touring spaces, and there's an opportunity for the permanent collection to have both items on permanent display there, as well as rotated through. And the intention from the outset with this project from government, from right back in the original announcements of government, was to see much more of the collection on display to the people of New South Wales and nationally. And this decision actually provides a hugely enhanced opportunity to do that, because we have the large spaces in Ultimo to be retained, and we have these fabulous new spaces in Parramatta. So I think we can achieve what you're alluding to. I don't doubt it'll be challenging to secure the world-class exhibitions that we are seeking, and I think we'd also be very keen to see support from government for the acquisition of new large items in a 21st century context, and that's a conversation the Trust would have with government over the course of the next few years. But I'm still confident that we can display a great collection and great touring exhibitions in Parramatta.
Ms. Havilah, have you been able to overcome the problems that were highlighted at a previous hearing where it was revealed that there were no entrances, no elevators, no escalators into the Parramatta site? Have you been able to resolve that matter?
Yes, through the design development process, I'm pleased to let you know that
There will be an entrance?
They were always there. They were always there.
that there will be actually two entrances to Powerhouse
Oh,
Parramatta.
my gracious.
And where will those two entrances be?
You need 2 exits because of the flooding, so we should start there.
Okay, no, I want to hear the answer.
So
dear.
if you are coming from, one of the great things about the location of the museum is that we'll be integrated into the Civic Link, which will connect Parramatta Station, Parramatta Square. So if you're coming down the major Civic Link and cross Phillip Street, the main arrival area will be to the left-hand side in the western building. If you're coming from the river level, there'll be a major set of stairs in the centre of the museum precinct. So you'll be able to walk up the stairs to the museum public domain and enter into the building. If you need access assistance, there'll also be a lift that will have 24-hour access.
In late 2024, if the museum is finished at Parramatta, where will your offices be?
In Parramatta.
They'll be in
That's our flagship, and that's where we're planning to have the majority of our staff. We'll also have staff at Castle Hill, of course, because that's where we'll be consolidating our collections. So our collection and research staff will be based there.
Professor Glover, have there been any changes to the board in the last 2 months?
Not in the last 2 months, no. No, we have vacancies on the board at the moment, which I had been in discussion with the Premier's office when the Premier was the Arts Minister, and now with Minister Harwin in relation to those vacancies and appropriate names for government to consider.
And how many vacancies are there currently on MASS?
Now, I'm about to say two. Two, just to be accurate, yes, 2.
Thank you.
And my position comes up at the end of this year when I step down.
Yep. When you step down.
Yes.
Are you planning to?
Yes, my term is completed at the end of this year.
And you plan to
Yes.
step down then? Okay.
I'll be
Thank
stepping
you.
down.
Any more questions? Any more comments?
No, I'm fine.
I'm sure I've got some.
You do have comments, yeah.
Ms. Havilah, one of the critiques about the proposal for the Parramatta site is that it will have significantly less exhibition space that meets museum standard climate controls. The analysis that's been provided to my office is that the Parramatta facility will have just 5,200 square metres of that, whereas the current Powerhouse Museum at Ultimo has 21,800 square metres of museum standard climate controlled exhibition space. Why is there such a radical reduction in this important environment at
I'm
Parramatta?
not sure where you got those figures from, but they are incorrect. There will actually be 18,000 square metres of exhibition and public space in Parramatta. The overall museum will be 30,000 square metres. All of the exhibition spaces will be climate controlled to international standard. And the whole of the museum has actually been engineered to be able to present the Powerhouse collection.
So, in terms of the 19,000, I think 800 square metres that was in the initial plans for the Parramatta facility, is your evidence that all of the public exhibition spaces will be engineered to a standard that has them at the museum standard for climate-controlled exhibitions?
All of the exhibition spaces at Powerhouse Parramatta will be designed to international museum standard, including climate control. And I'm happy to take it on notice so I can give you those accurate, detailed
And
figures.
the comparison between the two, if you would, Ms.
Absolutely,
Havilah?
yep.
Mr Chair, I do note it's 2 minutes over when we're supposed to stop. And I need to go to the bathroom.
Well, we're making up the time that you wasted.
With respect, Mr Chair, at the beginning of this, we determined not to have allotted time for government questioning, and I think
correct
asking
myself,
that question was
Mr.
inappropriate.
Khan wasted.
I do my best.
Any more questions? No more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. I don't think you took anything on notice today.
That last
Always
question.
like to make a
Last question was? Okay,
contribution.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chair.